I wanted to talk about thwarting unfair systems, or better yet, systems that we live with every day that don't work so well. And they're all around us. At the end of this, I'd like you to recognize some of them and play with them a bit. As a matter of fact, I'm going to refer to our last presentation because you know that sign where it has the speed limit and it tells you what it is and it's supposed to help you reduce your speed? Somehow I have this burning desire to see how high I could get the numbers. And if it was a smiley face or unhappy face, I'm sure in my case there'd be a finger sticking up and it wouldn't be the pointer. So, definitions of a system. Complex rules or methods governing behavior. That sounds sophisticated, doesn't it? The next one is organization or an organized manner of doing things. Orderliness by virtue of being methodical and well organized. Gosh, that sounds boring, doesn't it? Most systems are. So why do we have these things that are all around us? Well, they provide us a process to train people for complicated things. You know, what do we do when somebody doesn't know what one step to the next step to the next step is? And how do we train them to do it? So we develop systems. It also provides for efficiency and economy when we've got to train people, not only internal users that are going to be managing the system, but external people that are going to be using the system. So it provides for, and these systems provide for the most common transactions. Major problems with systems, and then we'll get into the fun of it. They assume compliance. What happens if you happen to be a little bit of a rebel? Any rebels in the room? Yeah, well, I'm glad I have good company. They don't provide for non-typical or fringe issues. And I like Fringe a whole lot. How many people watch Fringe, just out of curiosity?
Awesome show.
Awesome show. But whenever those strange things happen, most systems don't deal with them very well. And they typically don't provide for exceptions or failure. But they fail often. They also almost never, ever assume somebody might defraud the system. So what happens when things in a system fail? Like this is a good example. This was a nice keynote presentation, and we get WordPress, and things get jumbled around here. So, but systems are typically designed to flow only in one direction. Start to finish, beginning to end are the typical things. What happens when things don't do that? Something happens in the middle, or you get to the end and you find out, oops, we got a problem. They don't typically accommodate that. And also, they assume that all inputs will only start at the same place and each step will always successfully complete. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we all had 1,000 batting average? Big statement here. Both of these assumptions are dead wrong all the time. Interesting side note here, a tidbit I'd say. Do you know that the U.S. government every month declares 1,100 people dead that are still living? Is that a little bit of a broken system?
You have a typo.
I probably have more than one, but thank you. An example of a failed system. The typo. So what are examples of this? We've got limited time, so we're only going to talk about a few of them. But what happens when you get important notices that you might not get? Like for jury duty, or for non-payment of a traffic ticket or fine that maybe you don't know that you had. You loaned your car to somebody, and maybe they happen to take it or whatever. How about continuing education? And most of these are only delivered by one method, one time, without any verification. And I answered the why question here. That's typically just because of cost. But I'm going to look at one issue in greater detail, and then we're going to have a little fun with it, I hope. Unpaid parking tickets. How many of us have had a parking ticket? Wow, we're in a good crowd. Well, we're going to teach you how to play with the system a bit. Typically, if you've got an unpaid parking ticket and you haven't paid it in the right time frame, what do? They send you a notice that said, hey, you haven't paid your ticket, and all these nasty, bad, ugly things are going to happen to you, but if you pay it in the next 20 days, just pay an extra $10 and we're all good, okay? And then they mail the notice of that after they've accessed the DMV database. So the database has the right address, right? No? It doesn't always happen that way? Well, you're right. It's wrong 30% of the time. But after that, they mail this notice of violation, and they get paid, right? Well, not always. But what happens when they get paid? It's done and over with, right? How many people say yes?
No.
No, it's not done and over with. There's lots of stuff left over. What happens if you don't get paid the correct amount? Well, if you underpay them, it's easy, isn't it? They just reject it and you're still in violation. What happens if you overpay? That's an interesting question. So the unpaid parking ticket that wasn't paid, you get an additional notice, increased fees. Then they notify DMV and, they suspend your license and they don't let you renew your tag and little things like that. And that's the end of it, right?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Let's talk about the overpayment breakage. And I'm going to give you a recommendation here. You want to play with the systems? How many rebels did we have? Great. My goal is to enlist more rebels. We're going to say overpay the ticket or fine. Why would you do that? Now, we had a really cheap fine here. It's only $25. So you get your money order and you mail them $27, right? They contact you regarding the overpayment, and you say, hey, no problem. Just send me the refund. And they send you the refund check, except you never cash it. Now, you know what happens? Their system can't clear and finalize the transaction. Let's assume that this happened to be a speeding ticket. Now, this isn't true in most states. Now, one of the things I'm not doing here is saying which states it's true and in which states it's not, just because this is for educational purposes only. Right? Okay, good. Thank you very much. But now that you overpay the ticket and they have this outstanding refund to you and it's not closed, you know what doesn't happen? They can't finalize the ticket and they can't report points to the DMV. Wow. Isn't that interesting? And oh, by the way, then you end up with a clean record. Your insurance rates don't go up, which is far bigger than the ticket, right? So, but this is an example of a system problem. You know that in most cases, one of the issues that pop up is the person that's internal and operating on that system, they can't enter the payment because it only lets them enter the exact payment amount. So they enter the exact payment amount, and sometimes it then gets put in the desk drawer while they wait for the supervisor, whenever that might be. How many times do you think those get forgotten? Tons. Notice breakage. This is one of my favorite ones, and this happens all the time. They mail you a notice. Now, we talked about the address not being right a lot, correct? Okay. But they always get it returned back to them. When they get it returned back to them, they could take action and give you the new notice, right? What happened here? You notice that this was mailed, and I apologize for the writing. I tried to make it as big as I could. It was mailed on March 21st, 2008. And the U.S. Post Office, in the most efficient manner, decided that it was undeliverable and needed to return it to sender. And they did so in a very timely and efficient manner 480 days later. You've got a payment breakage problem and a notice breakage problem. Neither one of those were considered in that system. Now, is this common in just traffic tickets or parking tickets or anything? Absolutely not. In fact, it is really common in almost every bureaucratic process you have. It's a wonderful thing. Let's talk about a real life story. A parking meter that was a pay station. I go decide to have a nice day at the beach with my wife and family, and I've got $5, I don't need more money than that. That's plenty of time for the parking. And I put $5 in the pay station, and it gives me a $1 ticket. And I'm looking around, and there's nobody there. Well, I'm only going to be at the beach for 2 hours anyway, and this is an hour ticket. I'll put it up there, and if I get the ticket, I'll deal with it. Being efficient and on top of things, and with their desire to generate parking revenue, I get the ticket. So I file the written protest. When I file the written protest, I notify the authorities that it vended improperly, and I requested an audit of the money collected out of that pay station versus the time vended. Reasonable request? Yeah, reasonable request. How many of you would think of that? Thank you. And guess what they said?
Forget about the ticket.
Well, we don't do that. What do you mean you don't do that? How do you know if there's validity to what I'm telling you or not? They send somebody down along the pay stations, and they've got a big thing, and they empty the money in and go to the next one and empty the money in, and that's the extent of the procedure of the system. So I go to court, and as I go to court, I had issued a subpoena to the municipality for the records, and of course they didn't provide them, and I told the judge that. And the judge says, case dismissed, and I'm happy. He says, no, don't go away. Okay, what did I do wrong now? And then he turned to the police officer who was there, and he said, listen, I've heard too many issues like this. The next time I get one of these, the mayor and the chief of police will be down here, and we'll be talking about contempt and a night in jail. Can we get this fixed now? Now, does that help get systems fixed?
Yeah.
Is that reasonable to everybody? Let's talk about handicap parking. Like I said, we're only going to get into a couple of issues. I go in and I park in a handicap spot. Did I know it was a handicap spot? No. I mean, I'm a rebel, but I'm not going to park in a handicap spot. And I found out the next day that the space wasn't properly marked. As a matter of fact, I went out in the morning and I said, oh man, how did I get this ticket? In fact, they even told me when I checked in the night before, be careful, don't park in the handicap spots. They really are on top of ticketing you here. So I was very careful. How did I get the ticket? So I back out of the parking spot, and I'm going, wow, it's marked. I could see it. How did I miss this? We were in this local beachside community all day long, and we returned there in the evening. And in the evening, I drove by the parking spot. Guess what?
Unmarked at night.
I couldn't see any of the markings at all, even with the headlights of the van on the parking spot. Now, I happen to be a general contractor, and I happen to know the way they're supposed to be marked, and I looked at it and I said, wow, it's not marked properly. So I did the common and proper thing, and I went to protest and let the police department know that, hey, got to protest. So I protest. It happens to be in one of these nice communities where, unless you live locally, they don't send you notice of your appeal hearing. That's interesting, isn't it? Isn't that a violation of something that we have called due process? Even applies to parking tickets. So I say, okay, well, that's not going to fly. I continue to go through the appeal process because if I pay the ticket, I'm admitting guilt. And I change it from a simple matter to a more complex matter. Don't want to do that. So I said, okay, I can't get my tag renewed, but when I get a ticket for driving on an expired tag, I get a judicial hearing. I get to tell the story. Judge didn't believe the story at first. But then after he heard some of the attorneys and we had some discussion, and as a matter of fact, my wife had the discussion, he believed the story. And lo and behold, he says, listen, I can't deal with that issue, but we're going to let you off this issue. And good luck in dealing with that. But we did have to pay the initial fine for the expired tag violation. But all the other stuff was waived. But now, guess what? I'm a damaged party because I had to pay a fine for trying to do something without due process and procedure being followed. And so what do? I find an attorney that will take another system, the ADA system, American with Disabilities Act. And you know what that says? I bet you think it says that if you are a disabled person and people don't comply and damage you or whatever, then you have right to damages. Doesn't say that. It says if you are damaged by non-ADA compliance, then the ADA law is good to protect you. So guess what? The ADA law now applies to me. Another government system. And you know what it says? I don't have to prove anything except there was a violation. And they already mandate the fine, $10,000, to the city and to the business. Now, do you think that this might actually maybe change the system?
No.
Maybe it won't. I think it might at least get them to look at it differently. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today, because we're going to run out of time, is checks. How many of you still use checks? Okay, first thing, keep them very, very, very close to the vest. But I'm going to tell you a lot of things here today that maybe you don't know. You know that virtually all checks are automatically processed through an automated system now. They're OCR'd. Do you know that they only look at one thing on the check? They only look at the dollar amount, the numeric amount. That's all they look at now. Now, if you'd like to test this, and I do this all the time for the fun of it, on the signature line, sign anything you want. Somebody says, can you put your John Hancock on this? Guess what I put on it? I like to sign with fraudulent signature. Does it do anything? No, not at all. But there's something new that's happening. By the way, if you've got an old stale check, they don't talk about that anymore because you could still put it through the system. If it's not made out to you, guess what they don't look at anymore? Through the automated systems.
Who it's made out to?
They don't look at who it's made out to. As a matter of fact, you know these nice ATMs now that do the deposits, what do they call, the slipless deposits? All it looks at is your account number from your ATM card and the amount. So now if you happen to get a check from your old roommate and guess what, they owe you money and you deserve it, if you happen to put it through the system, guess what? It's going to go through the system. So what I did here, and my hope, is to encourage you to look at systems just a little bit different. Be a little bit of a rebel, play with them just a bit, and hopefully we could do something to make those systems just a little bit better, in all sincerity. And if you're involved in systems, make sure that they have a reverse path, and also make sure that all systems have an appeal process. And if we could do this, we'll all live with better systems. Thanks so much.